Imagine spending hundreds or even thousands of dollars a year on something you could get for just a few dollars. That's the reality for millions of people who choose bottled water over tap water. The bottled water industry is a multi-billion-dollar behemoth, raking in a staggering $243.6 billion annually. This massive profit margin is fueled by clever marketing campaigns that convince us that bottled water is cleaner, healthier, and tastes better than tap water. So the first thing we need to talk about is both the price and perceived value of bottled water, which can be significantly more expensive than tap water. The average price of tap water in the United States is around $1.50 to $4 for 1,000 gallons, which means that a single gallon costs just a fraction of a cent. To put this in perspective, an average family of 4 needs around 1,230 gallons of water per year for drinking purposes. That means their bill for drinking water from the tap would be between $184 and $492 for the entire year. Now, on the other hand, data from the website Global Product Prices shows us that in January of this year, the average 1.5 liter bottle of water in the US cost $1.46. That's $3.69 per gallon, or 2,460 times what water costs from the tap. Now, the problem here is that in many cases, it's essentially the same product. Certain brands like Dasani and Aquafina get their water from the same municipal treatment plants that supply public drinking water, the only difference being that the water is filtered. With bottled water, you're paying a premium for something that's available to you for a fraction of the cost, with the added risk of microplastics and hormone disruption chemical exposure from the bottle, but more on that in just a minute. The bottled water industry is notorious for its misleading and exaggerated marketing tactics. Brands often promote their products as pure, natural, and healthy, and superior to tap water. These companies make claims like "pure life begins now" and "Earth's finest water, which is created by nature." And some companies acting like theirs is the only water you should be drinking for hydration after a workout, even though all water is hydrating. So is it any wonder that we all think bottled water is so much better when we see ads like these all the time, when tap water doesn't get marketed at all? I don't think you need me to tell you that many of these claims in bottled water advertising are misleading at the very least. And numerous brands have actually gotten into trouble for making false claims in their marketing. In July of this year, the Plastic Pollution Coalition announced that it had filed a false advertising lawsuit for Danone Waters of America, which the PPC claims misleadingly represented Evian bottled water as sustainable, natural, healthy, and environmentally friendly, despite the water containing microplastics and BPA and creating plastic pollution. And consumers have recently filed class action lawsuits against Nestle USA, claiming the company was misleading about the purity of its Perrier mineral water, the wonderful company for falsely advertising Fiji bottled water as a natural artesian water, although it was found to contain microplastics, and Poland Spring for being advertised as 100% natural spring water, although it contains microplastics again and phthalates. So the problem here is that some manufacturers are making blanket statements that aren't always true. Claims that their water is pure, healthy, and natural feed into our beliefs that bottled water is purer and healthier and more natural than tap water, which is exactly what they want us to think, but these claims often are not supported by evidence and are not always true. As an example, even if a water product has been purified by reverse osmosis, calling it pure can still be misleading because there are some contaminants like dissolved gases that reverse osmosis doesn't remove. Bottled RO water is often infused with minerals that obviously affects their purity, and all bottled water products are at risk of microplastics and bisphenols leaching from the bottles themselves, again compromising their purity. So, not to say that all bottled water companies are deliberately trying to mislead you through their advertising, but they are trying to convince you that their product is the best. So we all know that bottled water is often marketed to be safer and healthier than tap water, and I'm not disputing that in many cases it very likely is. But here's the kicker: bottled water is not as strictly regulated as tap water and doesn't require the same testing and transparency that public water systems have to provide. This raises questions about the safety of bottled water because we often just have to take the manufacturer's word for it. In the US, bottled water is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, which oversees inspections of bottling plants. The FDA adopts the tap water regulations set by the Environmental Protection Agency, or determines that a standard is not necessary for bottled water. All of this is outlined in the Code of Federal Regulations Title 21, which lists 88 substances and their maximum allowable levels in bottled water. While most of these regulations align with the EPA's maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs, for tap water, there are a few exceptions, such as lead, which actually has a lower limit for bottled water. However, the most significant difference lies in the underlying purpose of these regulations, so let me explain. The EPA's MCLs are developed to balance public health with the treatment costs borne by water utilities. In contrast, bottled water is primarily used for human consumption, and the maximum allowable levels of contaminants in bottled water should ideally prioritize human health alone. Now, the EPA also sets maximum contaminant level goals, or MCLGs, which are intended to be strictly health protective. Unfortunately, the FDA has adopted the less stringent MCLs for bottled water regulations rather than the more conservative MCLGs. Something else to highlight is that the FDA isn't always the quickest to keep up with EPA regulations for new contaminants. For example, in 1992, the EPA implemented a new MCL for DHEP, a probable human carcinogen, and the FDA didn't follow up with a bottled water quality standard until 10 years later in 2012. And so it's no surprise that we don't see any PFAS compounds listed in the FDA's documentation for bottled water, even though the EPA issued MCLs for 6 forever chemicals back in April of this year. And unlike the EPA, the FDA doesn't have the authority to require bottled water samples to be analyzed at certified labs, which means most of the required water quality analysis is being conducted by the manufacturers themselves. And bottled water manufacturers don't legally have to disclose water quality information on the bottles unless testing shows contaminants are present in concentrations higher than current regulations. So obviously this is never happening, because what manufacturer would try to sell a product which is required to be labeled as contains excessive bacteria, contains excessive arsenic or chemical substances, or is excessively radioactive? And if the label does ever contain any information about what's actually in the water, of course these companies are only showing concentrations of a few healthy minerals and irrelevant information like total fat and calories. That means the water quality information that we as consumers have is inconsistent from one brand to another. It's no wonder then that bottled water may often contain trace contaminants that are not disclosed and may even be dangerous to drink. When these manufacturers aren't as heavily regulated as public water systems, we have to question product safety. Back in 2021, a Nevada-based premium bottled water brand called Real Water was recalled after being linked to acute liver disease from non-viral hepatitis A, including one death in people who had consumed the water. It was claimed that the bottled water was prepared, packed, or held under insanitary conditions, which caused it to become contaminated. And in March of this year, the FDA issued an enforcement report which led to the recall of more than 78,000 cases of Fiji water due to elevated levels of manganese and bacteria detected during testing. Bottled water companies often paint a rosy picture of their products being pure and natural. However, the reality behind the scenes is far less idyllic. The production, transportation, and disposal of plastic bottles have a significant negative impact on both the environment and our health. The production of the bottles themselves requires a vast amount of resources, including fossil fuels and water. Additionally, the manufacturing process releases harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and once produced, these bottles are often transported long distance, further contributing to carbon emissions. When it comes to disposal, in the US, over 91% of all plastic, including single-use bottles, ends up either incinerated or in landfills. This plastic waste takes up to 450 years to decompose and can harm wildlife. And then there's the health risks associated with drinking the water that's stored in these plastic bottles. A 2024 study of 3 popular bottled water brands found that a liter of their bottled water included about 240,000 tiny pieces of plastic. Just a bit concerning when microplastics consumption has been linked to cancer, reproductive problems, neurotoxicity, and altered metabolism. Another study from 2017 found that considerable amounts of BPA leached from polycarbonate plastic water bottles within their first 24 hours of storage. According to Mayo Clinic, exposure to BPA has been linked to health and behavioral effects in fetuses, infants, and children, as well as increased blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. Given the environmental and health risks associated with bottled water, it's surprising it remains so popular. It's time to rethink our consumption habits and choose healthier and more sustainable alternatives, such as filtering our own tap water and using reusable water bottles. Now, I also want to recognize that there are certain instances and situations where bottled water is valuable and even an essential resource. During natural disasters, public health crises, or other emergencies, bottled water can be a lifesaver when municipal tap water is compromised or unavailable. So in these situations, bottled water provides a safe and reliable source of hydration. And of course, bottled water has become the only option for many living in developing countries around the world that don't have access to clean or safe drinking water from the tap. If your only options are dangerously contaminated water or bottled water, of course you're gonna have to rely on what's safe and available and not gonna make you immediately sick. So while bottled water can be a useful tool in certain circumstances, it's essential to understand the downsides, especially when it's relied upon for daily hydration. Now, if you're concerned about the quality of your tap water or the environmental impact of single-use bottles, filtering the water from your tap at home is a great alternative. Filtering can significantly improve the taste, quality, and safety of your drinking water while saving you money that's otherwise wasted on single-use bottles. There are many different types of water filters available, from simple pitcher filters to more complex whole house systems. And the best option for you will of course depend on your specific needs and budget, which you can learn all about in this video. So there are a few key advantages to filtering your own tap water at home compared to buying packaged water. First, as I already alluded to, it can be significantly cheaper. So as an example, many water filters can provide clean water for less than 30 cents a gallon. This is 12 times cheaper than the average cost of buying 1.5 liter bottles of water, which comes to an average of $3.69 a gallon. Reverse osmosis systems, the same filtration method used by many bottled water companies, can be even more cost effective at just 8 to 16 cents per gallon. By switching to a water filter, you can save hundreds of dollars per year compared to purchasing bottled water. And then there's the fact that many water filters have been tested and certified to reduce specific contaminants. So if there are impurities that you know your water contains, either because they're listed on your water quality report or because you've recently tested your water yourself, you can find a filtration system that will address these contaminants so you know exactly what you're drinking, which is something that cannot be said of bottled water. Water filters also improve the taste of your tap water by removing the disinfectant chemical like chlorine, and some even add healthy minerals back in or increase the pH. And so this is a key point because many folks drink bottled water because they prefer its taste. So at the end of the day, when you buy bottled water, you're essentially paying for the plastic container and the energy required to transport it to you. You can get better tasting water for a fraction of the cost by filtering your tap water at home. And so if you're ready to kick your bottled water habit, click or tap right now to watch the next video about some of the best water filters that I've personally tested.